All right, it's another one of these Homeric Rhapsody things. We're currently in Book 8, or what's known in the modern era as Book 8 at least. Um, I'm basically just making up a story to try and get us to Book 9 because I don't really remember what happens in Book 8. Or at least not in this part of Book 8. So we'll see what happens. Here we go. Thus had that lord of the dark clouds' golden scales fallen into the day of doom for the Achaeans, and had raised up for the Trojans. And down on the plain Hector and his men and all his lieutenants and captains were slowly pushing the Achaeans further and further back, always on their heels, always holding up the great ox-hide shields to try and block those deadly spear throws. But all too many found with their eager points the flesh that they so craved, and all those spears would bury themselves in an arm or a chest cavity or someone's skull. Thus were the Achaeans slowly being picked forth and picked off as they flew backwards. But to their credit, they did not flee in flight, nor were they routed, but under the strong leadership of Aias for the Salaminians, and Odysseus for the Ithacans, and Nestor, that Geranian horseman from Pylos, and oh so many of the Greek captains, they had kept their ranks and fallen back with their chests toward the foe, as the brave man would hope ever to do under such strain. And thus, back at the Achaean camp were those Myrmidons still playing at quoits and running the foot race and throwing the discus. And Achaeus, that son of Aeacus, Achilles, was playing on the lyre, all too oblivious and not caring one whit what happened to his Achaean comrades. But all too soon was the fire of war to be raging about his camp even. Thus were all the captains pushed back, and each was on their toes and their heels. But Aias, every once so often, would take up his great ash spear and would cast forth into the Trojan ranks to try and create some breathing space for those Achaean soldiers. And he, at this moment, took up that spear and threw, seeing that son of Pelamon, Echamus, who had been raised on the green mountains of Gargarus, down by the river stream, where his mother had raised him on her own after having been visited by Hermes, that great god of the message, and that psychopomp who guided all the souls of the great lords to Hades. So he had been raised all through his childhood and brought forth in a life of splendor and happiness. But he was never to visit his mother again, as his life was cut short by that spear point of the giant Aias. It passed through his chin bone and went down through the spinal cord, severing the neck, and his head lolled to one side, falling over, held by only a small piece of string-like flesh, like a flower that had fallen over under too much rain, being weighed down by its own head. Thus was his life seeped out into the dust as the blood and spinal fluid flowed forth. But all too many were the Achaeans who fell beside Aias, even as he opened such an opening, as Pelamon and Acamas and Molion were all to fall next to him, even as he cast, and if he had not that great 7-layered oxhide shield that he carried like a tower in front of him, then he too would have fallen into the dust and be one more of those deadly flowers blooming on that field of battle. For many spears sprouted up in that shield, stuck into the oxhide, and he had to take his bronze blade and cast it downwards to snap off the shield, the hilts of those spears from the shield, allowing him more maneuverability. And all the captains besides led their men with encouragement, pulling backwards until they were at the edge of the camp. And so the Achaeans had fallen back and were almost upon them with their day of doom. But before they could be entirely wiped out, that chariot of Helios had reached its zenith over the sea and had fallen beneath the waves. And so all the fighting had ceased, and the Trojans, not returning to their city, had decided to camp out around the Achaean encampment, out of range of the archers and the spear throwers and the slingers, but close enough that all those Achaeans and Danaans could see the many campfires burning outside of their camp. And thus did the two armies return to their beds and their cots or their sleeping arrangements and took the gift of sleep. Damn, as I was getting to the end of that, I was just so disappointed because there's so many things I messed up about that. It's going to be really hard to well, I basically just cut it off at the end. I don't know why I made them go to sleep because there's still a lot of stuff that has to happen. But so they definitely have made the barricade or the ramparts before Book 9, because in the Achilles' speech in Book 9, he definitely mentions kind of like jealously that, well, they have this great big barricade. Why don't they use that to protect them instead of, asking for me to come back? So I'm pretty sure they made it at the beginning of Book 8. And so I don't know how they would now make it in the interim, because the Trojans are camped out right there. I'll probably just have to have them do it anyway. I also just skipped over all the really great parts where the stars is describing the stars in the sky, and Hector's telling his guys to set up all their campfires and bring food from their houses and stuff, because I was just so disappointed that I'm truly screwed up that part. Obviously not something you should do if you're doing a performance of this stuff. It doesn't really matter. The only thing that matters is that it become a good story. So I shouldn't let it get to me, you know, but I'll probably just in the next one have them build the ramparts anyway, even though it doesn't make logical sense, because it has to happen for the purpose of the story. So we'll do that, and we'll make it so that they didn't go to sleep, I guess. But you know, we're reaching a point where the limits of, you know, my ability to sort of like make changes off the top of my head are being tested, because yeah, I didn't work very well under duress there. The parts I came up with were fine, I guess. I did like a really extended thing about Ajax killing a guy and the, you know, heads falling, that one side's held on by a piece of skin and the spinal fluids coming out and stuff. That's all stuff from the Iliad, which is, you know, I can never even, for as graphic as it probably seems when I'm telling it, I'll never be able to do it as, you know, as the violence is extremely graphic in Homer's Iliad. And he does a better job. Like, the thing that's so good about his is that he gives like a backstory of the guy as he is killed. So you already know he's been killed, but then you hear about his life story and how his, you know, childhood was or whatever, which gives an extremely, you know, there's so much pathos in that, because you know that the guy was just had his, you know, jaw severed or whatever. And so it's like, or not even that, but it's like, you know, he got killed. It says he got killed, and then it tells his backstory, and then you see the really graphic scene of how he actually got killed. So I put one of those in there. But Homer just has so many of them, and I tend to only have one or two in my version, so I gotta get better and more creative with that. I'm trying also to come up with more names, like off the top of my head, and sometimes they're not such good ones, but I think I'm doing all right with that. I think I've done Alchemist and Chromius maybe like 10 times each at this point. They've been killed many times. Maybe, I guess it's just a lot of guys named Alchemist though. Yeah, I don't know. Again, today is not my best like sort of storytelling day, but again, it's going to change every day. You know, you're never going to be the same quality level one day as you were the previous. But you know, let's just keep going with it and see how it goes.